Welcome back to another episode of FPO&G, Financial Planning for Oil and Gas Professionals. This week on the podcast, we are going to talk about what do people actually spend in retirement. And I think we're going to talk about a piece of JPMorgan research that talks all about this. We're going to summarize the report. We're going to also kind of parse it out. Like, hey, what's signal? What's noise? What was missed out? And then we're also going to kind of talk about, hey, from the vantage point of oil and gas professionals, how is this different or similar than the lived experience of what's in this report? And then we're also going to kind of pull kind of some rough data that we pulled from our client list. Is that, hey, does the data that we're seeing support this? And I want to thank one of our listeners, because Justin and I were waiting till the last minute. And this podcast will go live next Friday, and we're recording this in mid-November. And a listener sent us an email saying, hey, I saw this video and I'd love for y'all to talk about it. So you know who you are. We appreciate you. And if you have ideas for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. Makes our job easy, and it's a lot of fun.
And if you do, then we will appreciate you.
That's right. And we still do appreciate you, but appreciation squared.
Just a little bit less.
Okay, Justin, before we get in, surprise segment. I know I asked you a question last time, but I have such a good question that I wanted to ask you again. So, okay.
Let's hear it.
This is in mid-November. So Ole Miss has its sights set on a college football playoff. You are Lane Kiffin.
Wow, what a question.
Do you stay at Ole Miss? Or do you go to LSU or Florida? And tell me why.
No, I did not know this question was coming, but I'm ready to go full speed ahead on my answer. You do not stay at Ole Miss. You leave Ole Miss. You go to Florida. Here's why. There's a couple factors at play. College football is a very regional sport. The regionality of college football, in some ways, could be mitigated a little bit with NIL. In other ways it won't be. Let me touch on the regionality real quick. If you love college football, you're going to know where I'm coming from. If you don't, I'll try to be brief. Let's go back to 2010. Clemson and South Carolina are, both pretty good. At this time, Georgia is pretty good. And my theory is that's a very talent-rich part of the country. So if you follow football, there's plenty of recruits, right? From Georgia, South Carolina, that entire region. It's a hotbed for talent. But here's the problem. That region cannot support 5 elite programs. So I want you to notice something from 2010 to 2015. The early 2010s was arguably South Carolina's greatest stretch of success in the modern era ever. South Carolina has largely struggled since then. What happened in kind of the mid-2015s when South Carolina tapered off? Clemson won their first national title. And Clemson started, really a run that kind of rivaled Bama for a good 5, 6, 7 years there, winning multiple national championships. So what my premise is there is it's not possible. That region cannot support multiple juggernauts. And so you kind of see, typically you're going to see, okay, Clemson might draw back a little bit, then Georgia starts their run of winning multiple national championships. So there's just not room in states that border each other for there to be, 3 straight years, 3 different teams are winning a national title. That's really difficult to do. I guess I'd have to think through. It's possible Auburn, Bama, came close, trying to think through who else won titles around that time. But Jared, I want to get back to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is in a very difficult existence right now. And here's why. So obviously Mississippi is a massively talent-rich state. They're next to Louisiana, massive, massive talent in Louisiana, also next to Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas nearby. So you've got a lot of great high school football. You have a lot of talent. Texas and Florida are not far away. But the region that Mississippi is in is a brutal region. It's really not a region you want to be in. I always joke, I've got a brother-in-law who's a big Mississippi State fan. And I don't joke. I talk in a pretty somber tone with him about this, just saying, man, your existence is really hard. And I used to hate the SEC. I used to fight it. I went to Kansas State, big Kansas State fan. And guess what? At the end of the day, the narrative became reality. The SEC is on a different planet. It's really hard to exist with those programs. And Ole Miss is just right in the thick of a ton of great programs. So, Jared, what did I say? I'm going to Florida, right?
Yep.
Why am I not going to LSU?
I mean, LSU is also a talent-rich state.
LSU is a wonderful program. Wonderful program. I'm picking Florida, and I'm not necessarily making a bold claim here. So I'm not, sticking my chest out with this, but I'm going to pick Florida ahead of LSU because in the NIL era, Florida is an incredible institution. Incredible university, incredible graduate programs, very, very wealthy alum base. So I'll try to be brief with this as well, but I know I'm already running probably longer than you want me to on this answer. Um, Here's the thing: in college football, there's Texas and there's Texas A&M. And a lot of people don't realize this. College football is now Major League Baseball. There is no salary cap. But in college football, there are no luxury tax penalties like there are in Major League Baseball. So what we're staring at is the equivalent of the New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers. That's UT and A&M. And then in baseball, we at least have 10 other metro areas that are massive that have plenty of money to spend. We don't have that in college football. UT and A&M are on a different planet than everyone else. So it's more like you have Yankees, you have Dodgers, and then you have like 20 Cincinnati Reds. So every now and then, 4 of them are going to spend a ton, and they're going to have a payroll that's up there with the Yankees and the Dodgers. That's what happens in baseball. A few of the mid-market teams do that. So we will see that in college football. But we then have about 60 AAA teams. So that's the landscape. College football is now baseball, where you have the Dodgers and Yankees. But then past the Dodgers and Yankees, there's 20 Cincinnati Reds, and then there's 60 AAA programs. So if I am not able to be UT or A&M, I want to be Florida. I think that is the next wealthiest pool. But here's the last thing I'll say, Jared. It's tough to predict because guess what? Todd Graves is an LSU alum, right? Founder, owner of Cane's Chicken. LSU has plenty of wealthy alums too. So everybody has wealthy alums. So it's not just how much money do you have, it's how invested can you get, the deep pockets. So if I'm Lane, I'm going to Florida.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, it's almost like a pro for LSU is they have wealthy alums and their fan base is feral for the Tigers.
That's
right.
A great
Like if you think
point.
about how many pro sports teams are in Florida. Yeah, fascinating. I love how you lit up. I was just excited to ask you that question. You were technically supposed to ask me one, but I was sitting on it and I knew you'd have some strong thoughts.
Halfway into my answer, I was thinking, man, Jared's loving this. He's also thinking he better wrap it up. We need to get going.
Yeah. Not that you asked me, and I know we're way over on time, but I would probably stay at Ole Miss.
Really?
And I guess that's a testament to risk tolerance, right? Like if you think about, like if he goes 10-2 for the next 10 years, he will be the greatest coach at Ole Miss has ever had.
That's a really
right?
good point.
And like these fan bases where you're going to move up, like if you think about James Franklin getting fired, he was doing, I mean, I would argue he got that program out of a doghouse.
I totally agree.
Their bar was like unrealistically high. There's such a short leash. So like,
yes,
I think you're actually better off just, hey, I could kind of live on autopilot 9-3 in Ole Miss land and be the king of Oxford. Or I can make maybe 10% more and then have the expectations of a national title. Again, Ole Miss has a lower probability of a national title. I think, I don't think they could get one. So if Lane's like, hey, to be the coach I want to be, I have to get a national title. No, but if you're just trying to optimize for job security, career longevity, which is, the risk manager in me kind of bodes for that, I think Ole Miss is actually a pretty sweet arrangement he has.
Great point. If you're an LSU fan, you're thinking, how in the world are we not going to get him? But that's the thing. LSU, you're an incredible program. You win at the highest level. And to your point, Jared, yeah, that's hard. That's the expectation.
Ogeron won a national championship. And how long was his total coaching tenure at LSU?
Gosh, wasn't it like 4 or 5 years?
That's insane.
Which, I mean, I think they were probably right in what they did, but still,
that's a testament to how short the leash is.
Right.
Okay. Well, spending in retirement. I don't really have a seamless transition to get to that topic. Justin, let's talk about this study real quick. And there's going to be, it's loaded with slides. We'll link to the slides. And this is just kind of data. It's from JPMorgan. And a lot of it is spending data. And I don't know how large the sample size is, but my guess is it's significant, right? And this is just kind of a treasure trove of information. But we'll go through these slides pretty quick because I want to opine on them. But so first slide we're looking at is slide 10, and this is the income replacement need, and it talk about how it varies by household. So what's interesting is there's three things that make up retirement spending. There's how much do how much income do I need in retirement? It's a function of three things. Okay, how much are my employer plans going to pay? How much Social Security going to pay? And then, okay, what are my expenses? How much are they going to change? And one of the fascinating things about this research is the higher up your annual income is, the lower your replacement rate is. Meaning, so if we're looking at a $300,000 income, a $300,000 annual income, the income replacement need based on this is about their expenses are going to drop by 45% compared to somebody with 60,000. Their income's going to drop by their expenses are going to drop by 14%. Does that pass the smell test for you? And why do you think that is?
It's really interesting. On the one hand, yes, it does, Jared. When you have a lot more income, you pay a lot more taxes. So there is an element where, it is nice when you get into retirement because if you do proper planning, you can pay significantly less in taxes. So they don't necessarily have to recreate that gross paycheck, I guess. Um, but it's also surprising because, I mean, how many studies have there been done that show that when you make more money, you just find ways to spend it. Lifestyle creep always matches whatever you make. So there are some surprises there. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think it tracks, right? Like, I think a lot of it is just there's like a non-linearity to expenses, right? Like, if let's say this person in the example we gave, the 14% increase, that person makes more than 4x, right? So hypothetically, they have the budget to 4x everything, right? You're not going to pay 4x in healthcare what somebody in the 60K rung is paying, right? Like, there's some expenses that you just can't inflate dollar for dollar. Like, yeah, you're going to spend more on eating out, but you're not going to spend $3,000, like $1,000 a week if you're a 75-year-old, right? And so, like, I think there's also, you might get more house, and that'll be a meaningful increase in cost. But like, I also don't think a lot of those expenses. Oh, your income doubles, so those expenses naturally are just you're just going to double each category.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Okay, next slide I want to go to, slide 25. It looks at spending by category, and it compares two different cohorts. It compares the 35 to 44-year-old range cohort and 75 plus. And what they found is, mainly across categories, how did expenses kind of track, right? Because not every expense is going to be lower in retirement. Like, healthcare is a great example where, especially in the later years of your life, there's some potential high income, high care need years. But this chart shows a few different big categories. So housing, the younger cohort spent about 41.6% of their annual spending. 75 plus spent about 40% of their annual spending. So just slightly less, the retirees. Healthcare, younger cohort spent about 6.9%. Older cohort, retirees, spent about 16%, more than double. That tracks. That makes sense. Food and beverage, younger cohort, 15.3%. Retirees, 13.4%. So slight reduction there. Makes sense. As you get less mobile and older, your propensity to eat out and probably, spend on food and entertainment goes down. Transportation also goes down. Younger cohort, 19%. Retirement cohort, 12.4%. Gifts to charity. The younger cohort spent about 2.7%. And then the older cohort spent about 7%, which makes sense. As you get older, you think about legacy. You might, have better clarity as to what your future outlays is. You become more generous. All that kind of makes sense. Justin, any surprises or things you want to call out there?
Yes, Jared, biggest surprise for me is housing is more or less even across the two segments. I was really shocked by that.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting thinking about, like, hey, what is the average income of this demographic and what percent rent versus own? Because, like, mathematically, I cannot fathom how somebody, if most Americans that are retiring are homeowners and they have their home paid off, How is there a 1% reduction in the housing costs?
So, Jared, if you remember back to when we started this podcast, it was like what, 2022, I think. Um, and obviously the world had just like exploded economically, in good and bad ways. And so I remember doing so many podcasts in that first year, and we probably said 10 different times, well, this is kind of going to be a lagging indicator, and we're not going to see the full picture for years on what's happening now because inflation was kind of running wild. Assets were just exploding in value. Home prices, I mean, went up like 60% in maybe 16 months. So it was just crazy. So I'm saying all of that to say, I don't think this is, I guess it can make sense today, but Jared, that graph is about to get very different in the next 10 years. So if we take a look at, 74 plus age compared to 35 through 44, and we compare their housing costs 10 years from now, I guarantee you it is going to be wildly different. And the younger demographic will spend way more on housing than this one because a ton of people in this chart, what was the age gap? 35 to 44. A ton of them locked up their housing in a relatively fixed arrangement way before 2022.
Yeah. The more time that passes, the wonkier I think all this data is going to get. And I think you're going to need to parse it out because I think averages won't be indicative of the nuance of if you graduated from college post COVID bump to before and were a homeowner.
It's going to be night and day.
Different universe.
We always say this, but for a 40-year-old who bought their house, maybe 8 years ago, it is, you always kind of hear of, well, my grandpa was able to buy this house for $7,000, that type of thing. And it was back in 1967 or something. It is going to be that type of extreme verbiage when we talk about, the people who are today 40 and they were able to buy their house in 2019.
Yeah.
It's that big of an impact. So,
yeah, but it's also tough because it's going to change the outcomes, right? Because that annual spending by age and category, that's such a big proponent of spending, right? And if people have different expense numbers, like their longevity portfolio need is just very different. All right, Justin, let's keep cooking. So on page 27, it looks at the average household spending by age. And it's awesome because it shows, hey, over time, how do these expenses move by category and on the aggregate? So this is for somebody with $1 to $3 million in investable wealth. And if you look at the Cliff Notes, 'cause we love to look at Cliff Notes because we like being in the weeds, it excludes brokerage accounts. So it's all investment assets except for employer-sponsored plans, home equity, and other non-portable assets, which is just so weird, right? Like who is this demographic? And I'll talk about that a little later. But I really like this chart because it just shows, hey, healthcare kind of climbs up steady over time. Travel decreases. More discretionary expenses decrease over time as mobility kind of decreases. And on aggregate, expenses move down. So somebody with $1 to $3 million in investable wealth, their annual spending starts at $132,000 and it kind of tapers off to $93,000. And my guess is this is in present, there's, present value of those dollars. But again, a meaningful drop in retirement over that time period. Anything that you want to draw attention to or that surprises you as you look at this?
I mean, I think it's the last statement that you made, Jared. It's just really interesting to see a meaningful drop over time.
Yeah. But again, there's some volatility in spending. And page 28 is a great example of this. And it says 60% compared to the year before experience spending volatility. And that's spending fluctuations more than 20%. And then 52% of those people experience spending volatility from year to year between ages 75 and 80. The interesting thing, and I think like one of the things I love about this is like, it just gives you permission to just recognize the seasons of life, right? Like when you're modeling a retirement scenario, it's like, hey, I'm going to spend 120 grand a year, inflation adjusted. No, it's just like market returns. If I get 8% on the market annualized, I'm pretty much going to have 0 years where I actually get 8%. It's some more some years, less other years. Same with retirement spending. You're rarely ever going to spend exactly what you think. Life happens, there's seasonalities, but generally the trend is downward. So if you're building a financial plan that says, hey, I have to recreate 75% of my income and retain that indefinitely and inflation adjust that, you're likely you're likely over saving because generally things kind of trend down over time, even accounting for healthcare expenses being higher.
Right. Jared, I also want to just repeat something that we've said to a ton of our clients. What's the most expensive decade in life?
Probably your peak earning years, probably like kids, like college
Bingo.
age. Yeah.
Bingo. That's it. Nothing really even comes close. I mean, I guess if you end up just buying multiple homes in retirement, you could totally change this answer. But the most expensive decade in life is really the last 10 years or so as your kids are getting to age, I'm going to say 23, 24. Most kids aren't graduating fully at 22. So getting kids off the payroll, really nothing touches just how expensive that is when a kid is, say, age 10 to 20, 23, 24 or so.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, Justin. Well, let's talk about like what does this mean for oil and gas professionals, right? Like some of like I have thoughts, and I know you have thoughts too. Like, what if this is signal? What can oil and gas professionals learn from this? And what like maybe is noise? Like, oh, this isn't applicable to you, or oh, it's not capturing this nuance. Like, what is an oil and gas professional to do with this information to contextualize it to them and where they're at?
Well, I do think one is signal, and back to the kind of graph of how much you spend over time in different phases of life. Jared, I firmly believe that you were able to easily retire with quote unquote plain small ball with your finances. Meaning, I do think 10 years ago, it was really easy for the average American to maybe retire with $500,000. And maybe they're taking like $20,000 a year in income from that. And then it's supplementing two social securities, maybe another pension as well. But that small ball is able to easily work because life was drastically cheaper back then. And I do think it's still possible today for people to play small ball. But in order to play small ball, well, you really need to stay in the house that you purchased for 120,000, 15, 20, 25 years ago. Hopefully have it paid off. It's borderline impossible to do that today. So I do think oil and gas professionals today need to be very mindful of getting their retirement nest egg to that 5 million plus mark. I think that's very important. And if you do a simple kind of calculation on gross income from a portfolio, well, the 4% rule on 5 million, that's $200,000. And yes, you can supplement it with Social Security and potentially other sources, but there are a lot of people in oil and gas who make a lot more than that today. So I think that's the first thing. Be very mindful that yes, you need to build a much bigger balance sheet today if you want to be financially free than your parents probably did.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point, and I think that the more time that goes on, the more true that
The
becomes.
more true that becomes.
One big bone I want to pick: taxes in retirement. Right? Like that is one of the biggest. If you have your house paid off, that might be one of the biggest, if not the biggest line item, like in terms of a single category, right? Like that is going to be a huge difference in this analysis. And like that is one of the categories that has the most discretion. Right. So Justin, I did the math because I was curious, but so if you retire at 60 with a $4 million IRA, which sounds big, but that's really $2 million in what you saved and $2 million in a pension. And you take the RMD every year and that account grows at 7%. What's your RMD at age 90? Any idea?
No, what is it?
$1 million a year by age 90. You're taking $1 million a year outside that account.
Unbelievable.
Right. And so like, I love this analysis, but like for a lot of people, and especially a lot of people that have done a good job saving and have had remarkable benefits, the question isn't, hey, am I going to outlive my portfolio? The answer is probably probabilistically no. It's how do I manage my expenses? And one of the big ones to focus on is taxes.
Right.
And there's so much opportunity in shifting of income and optimizing, understanding lifetime tax rates and all that to really think about that. So again, the source of this, I think, was transaction data. So there's no way that they would capture that nuance. But I think if you're an oil and gas professional thinking through retirement planning, what does my income need? Man, taxes are such a big part of that.
$1 million in RMDs. I want to touch on something, Jared. When you think about taxes over time, yes, there is an element where there will be major inflationary increases in the marginal tax brackets in the coming decades. So in other words, $300,000 a year today, compared to $300,000 a year in 15 years, well, the tax brackets get inflationary adjustments. So 300,000 in 15 years likely will pay a much lower tax rate than 300,000 today. So it is easy to think, well, $1 million a year in RMDs, there are going to be massive inflation adjustments on those marginal tax rates. But one, not enough. It's still going to be a massive tax bill. But two, Jared, I think the thing that a lot of people forget about is you always have to plan too, tax wise. When you're talking about lifetime tax rates in retirement, you have to plan for a scenario where one spouse may pass away before the other. And then you're in a situation where you're filing as a single taxpayer, which is a totally different ballgame compared to married filing joint.
Yeah, that is such a great call. Man, I want to call this out too. I think another thing, like it's is noise. It is noise. I think to say that, hey, I'm in this income rung, so this is how much my expenses need to go down, and like, hey, I need to do exactly what is on the spreadsheet, right? Like, so the page we looked at that looked at spending by category over time, it said 1 to 3 million in investable net worth, and that was investable assets except for employer sponsored plans, home equity, and other non-portable assets. So what does that even mean? So someone with a $14 million net worth could fall into that category. Hey, let me break it down for you. You have $3 million in a 401k, $3 million in a pension, you own a $2 million home, you have $1 million in cash, and you have $3 million in a brokerage portfolio and $1 million in RSUs that are going to vest after your retirement. And technically that person falls into that cohort, right? Again, also somebody with a $2 million rollover IRA and no other assets would also fall into that same category.
Jared, I'm really glad you touched on this because when you sent me the material and the PDF and all of this data before, I looked at this point and was just thinking, what in the world is going on here? I have to be reading this wrong. Something is off. There's no way this means what it says it means. But it does. You're right.
Yeah. And that's why we want to kind of dive into data of like, hey, what are we seeing with our peer group, right? Because a lot of people want to know, how am I doing relative to people like me in this phase of life? And again, I think this data is supremely helpful in giving you an idea of these conceptual trends. Spending goes down over time. Taxes are something you need to consider. Hey, there's inflation across expense categories is not evenly distributed. You got to plan for a care need for health. Like, there's some really good principles in here, but to get hyper fixated on percentages, I don't think is appropriate because there's a lot of nuance that is lost in the simplicity of this analysis.
Great point.
What else? Anything else you would add?
I do like your point on, hey, you can be worried about overspending, and certainly that should be the primary. I mean, hey, at the end of the day, when you're facing retirement, the number one thing that you want to not happen is run out of money, right? But underspending and seeing your portfolio 6x from the starting point 20, 25 years later, well, that's also something to manage. And that brings a whole host of different issues.
Yeah, I think another thing that is absolutely signal, and something the spending volatility in retirement is like very real. And like, what I would say, I might call it like, there's a few different ways I might categorize it. We see like we'll see people retire, and their withdrawal rate their first 5 years is maybe 6 or 7%. And like the 4% rule, flashing red lights, oh, I can't do that. Here's a few things. There's some deferred maintenance of, hey, I had this thing I want to do and now I want to do it. Or, hey, I finally have the time to do that big trip I've wanted to do and now I want to do it. Or, or, hey, I might move somewhere else, or so I want to demo it and spend a month a year in this new place, right? So I think there's a lot of reasons why, especially early on, expenses are higher, and that's okay. They can be, right? Like, because your first 10 years of retirement, you don't have Social Security, right? So there's a decent chance that 5 years in, your portfolio needs to produce half of the income that it was producing, right? So like, a lot of people get hyper fixated on like, oh, if I'm spending 150K a year in retirement, I got to spend 150K a year in retirement. No. You might be able to spend a little more on the front end and a little less on the back end, understanding the nuances of your individual cash flow. So I think the idea of just like recognizing the reality of what I would say the spending volatility, I think that's a great important thing as you begin to model different scenarios.
And I mean, Jared, we may want to talk about this later in the podcast, but the individual who suggested that we touch on this subject, part of the context for wanting this conversation was a question around Hey, I would love to play a more meaningful role in my kids' financial lives now rather than them getting a multi-million dollar inheritance 25 years later after they've already figured out life. And so that's kind of a whole different topic. But hey, can we spend more now? Can we give more to kids now and still make ends meet?
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing, right? Like if you're underspending, which a lot of our clients skew engineers, so they skew risk managers, so they want a Monte Carlo that's 100%. There's upside probability and downside probability, right? A lot of times when we run a Monte Carlo, we're managing sequence of returns risk. What's the worst scenario, bear market? It's okay. But also, what's the best scenario? But okay, what does that mean things look like? And really kind of proactively planning uh, around that. Okay, Justin, I do think like, hey, like a lot of this, so there's just some valuable principles in here. One of the things I wanted to do is just kind of look at our lived experience for our client base. And this is all kind of rough estimates from our portfolio accounting software. But I kind of want to do some data to see, do some analysis. See, okay, does this pass the smell test for the lived experience of our clients? So here's some of the things that we learned. So 25% of retired clients are still working. So, and again, that's working presently. So the ratio of clients that retire that do some form of work is probably higher than that. The other thing that we learned is the average annual withdrawal is about 140,000 of somebody who's in the distribution phase, and the withdrawal rate is under 4%. And it's important to call out, hey, that is a gross distribution, meaning that's everything that came out of the account. So a lot of people, depending on what account you're taking from, I'm either making quarterly estimated tax payments or IRA withholding, right? So that is a gross distribution. So again, the
So
actual
expenses are less.
yeah, so expenses are actually less than that number. And the other interesting thing, I kind of parsed this out. There's about so the average retired client that is still working took about 115,000. The distribution was about 115,000 versus people that are fully retired, closer 30K higher, so closer to $150,000 a year, so 35K higher. So, does that pass the smell test? Does any of that surprise you? And then what should our listeners take away from that?
I think there are a couple of caveats that I do want to give here because 140,000 in a retirement distribution, if you are listening to this and you are 50 years old, you're probably thinking that that's a really low number. And how in the world am I going to retire on 140 gross, which means that, gosh, you're probably spending less than 10,000 a month. And I do want to provide a little bit of context. First of all, Jared, we have we have a lot of clients in the last 18 to 24 months that are kind of at the point where they're starting retirement now. And Jared, their take home or their expense number is about 30,000 a month. So I do want to throw that out there. We have a ton of clients that are kind of transitioning now where their take from their portfolio is going to be like mid six figures a year. Like it's going to be a huge number.
Yeah, but they have restricted stock or non-qualified deferred compensation. So they are no longer gainfully employed, but they are basically recreating a paycheck, and they're not working for the company, but they're getting compensation that's covering their expenses. So those people are not represented in this list, and those people have
Higher balance sheets, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good call out. But then there are another segment where maybe they've run to the end of their deferred comp or their RSUs, and they are full on retired, and they're going to take like 400,000 from their portfolio. So that's also we're seeing that a lot too. Now it's still at a sustainable withdrawal rate, so you can't just spend 400 if you have 4 million. Please don't do that. But I do want to just give that context that we started the firm in 2019, and then I could go back to the firm I was at previously and think about all of the experience and data from there. And I guess I want to repeat something that we've already said. Retirement is getting way more expensive as the years go by. So a lot of these numbers that Jared shared is skewed toward, what did I say, 10 minutes ago? It's skewed toward people that were able to get all of their assets and expenses purchased in yesteryear's prices.
And their kids went to school with yesteryear's tuition.
And their kids went to school. Jared, great point. And so they are playing a drastically different ball game. And frankly, if they were 10 years younger, they wouldn't have a prayer of spending 10,000 a month. They would be spending, at least twice that.
Yeah. Or their withdrawal rate would be 2x because they don't have the pension that a lot of these people have. Right. And so that's just another interesting nuance. And again, something to reiterate for our people for oil and gas professionals, a lot of the super majors have awesome retirement healthcare. Right. So like to apples, like if you're comparing it to the people in the study, one of the bigger expenses is healthcare. And a lot of super majors like ExxonMobil's plan is awesome. Like with a maximum out of pocket that's like incredible, better than
Yeah.
mine. And and I'm in
Yeah.
my 30s. And so like that's another thing of like, apples to apples, like that's a meaningful expense in retirement that has a really, really nice ceiling on it relative to what the average retiree is spending.
It's also interesting, Jared, this isn't in our notes. We weren't planning to talk about it. Um, I am just gonna, think out loud here, but I do think this is a critical point. What's fun about our job is we get to see people at different levels, right? And I'm gonna say something, see what you think about this. Jared, I cannot tell a meaningful difference in the happiness of clients. If I think about clients that are living on 8,000 a month, clients that are living on 18,000 a month, and then clients that are living on 28 or 38,000 a month. There's really not. And so it really does go to show that one, well, the keyest part of financially being in a joyful place is being in a secure place. That matters a ton. So having a sustainable withdrawal rate, that's very important. Being able to sleep at night, and then just finding a way to be content with whichever level you're at.
Mm, yeah, I think that's so good and so kind of understated. One other thing I want to talk about related to the data, we found about, we have a lot of clients under 50 and some like young, high earners, high income, high net worth people that are just young accumulators. We found over a dozen of them make distributions from their portfolio this year, despite not even, I would say, like not even being in their peak earning years yet. They preceded that, and we've saw I don't know, maybe 60%, more than half of the people making distributions, or 50% as many that were in retirement making distributions, and they were in peak earning years. So like, I'm curious, all these numbers you've thrown out, I also know we have clients who make great incomes but spend $40,000 a year. And they hear this 146K number, or you're one of our young accumulators who's making a distribution from their portfolio and they're under 50. What's your message to them?
Make a lot of money. Jared, I make a lot of money. That's the message. The data on this is crazy. So in our firm, it is almost an equal number of people that are, say, age 35 to 45-ish, and they're taking a material distribution from their portfolio compared to the number of people in our firm who are regularly taking retirement income. And so that was really fascinating, just how many large distributions they're taking. And, I think it's a function of a few things. I think part of it's a function of these are, what did I mention? Kind of starting the most expensive decade of their life. So these are distributions for either a home, distributions for renovating a home, joining a country club, or making a meaningful payment to maybe child's college tuition. And so it's typically one of those four buckets, is what I'm thinking through. But it's real, and I think it further emphasizes this idea that as time goes on, and if I think about a 75-year-old, a 65-year-old, a 55-year-old, and a 45-year-old, life is getting drastically more expensive as time goes on. And so we joke about, hey, the person who bought their house in 2019, it's like the 80-year-old that bought a house for $7,000. No, that's pretty real.
Yeah, I also think it illuminates kind of a changing nature of work, because you might be a retiree in this scenario and hear those statistics be like, the younger generation is screwed. I think of the people who are under 50 making distributions, their expected retirement age is probably higher than the average person today, right? A lot of them, I would say, have really fulfilling work and love what they do, and a lot of economic opportunity. So they have a lot of gas left in the tank. And so like, I think, hey, I think also the nature of retirement is changing. I think, our client data is evidence of this. I think the idea of full stop retirement, going from grinding to just completely not working, it's like, it's jarring. It's whiplash,
Yeah.
right? I think having a meaningful contribution to society at a pace, at a scale with people you appreciate is a valuable thing throughout your entire career. And I think the next generation is trying to think through, hey, I could do this part-time for an extended period of time. And my employer might be more open to that versus W-2, ExxonMobil. Hey, I want to be a subcontractor. Depending on who you are, they might say yes, but a lot of times they'll just, it's not really the game they want to play.
Jared, another thing that we're seeing among our younger clients relative to our more retired clients, vastly different perspectives and viewpoints in terms of what is a normal or reasonable expense. And so I think the most vivid examples of this I'm thinking are homes and country clubs. And I think we've seen this in an emphatic way across our client base. Younger clients, if they're in Houston and they're trying to solve this equation of I work near Memorial, I want to live right by where I work, and I want to try and send my kids to public school. Well, that's like a tiny area of the city where every home is, $2, $3, $4 million or more. And so there's this perspective where a 35-year-old is viewing, a $2 million home as, gosh, I might have to find a way to do this. And then a 65-year-old is just about to throw up thinking that's the most absurd idea ever. I would never go buy that. And that same thing's true with country clubs and where initiation fees have gone across Texas. And so we're seeing that in a big way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, to kind of wrap up, I think some of the big takeaways are, hey, I think understanding what people are spending and the directional flows, I think is a great starting point. I think understanding the seasonality and the lumpiness of it and giving you permission to lean into the seasonality of life, don't let that burden you. I think having a plan also matters, right? Hey, this is all theoretical constructs. Figure out what your expenses are. What percent are discretionary? What percent, you have to make? What percent are gifts? So that you can kind of be empowered to make good decisions. On average, hey, you're going to spend less in retirement. And then also too, I would say taxes matter, right? That's an expense where there's a lot of discretion in what you pay depending on your income plan. So I love this piece of research. I think it's really fascinating. Justin, anything you would add?
I think it could be an interesting time for us to do an update on that work from Die with Zero, the book that talks about, hey, don't try to pass away with 10 million or $100 million. Try to spend it and enjoy it or give it to family while they're younger. I'll just be real brief with this. Jared, the tricky part about this is, well, you really can't do that because a lot of people think, well, if I spend too much and I try to put that book into action, I'm flirting with disaster, meaning I'm flirting with the potential that I might run out of money 8 months before I pass away. And then I'm going to have no money for my last 8 months. And that's going to create a whole host of problems. And as a financial planner who does a significant amount of cash flow analysis, we can both say that, no, you're not flirting with running out of money 8 months before you pass away. You're flirting with running out of money 18 years before you pass away, if you actually go down that path. And that's how wild some of the differences between different withdrawal rates, as well as your portfolio, as well as future inflation, as well as future market returns. All of those factors, the outcomes can be that wildly different. And so that's why that idea is so tricky and difficult. But you still want to, make the most of your cash flow and not hoard it all, but, live a meaningful life with it and hopefully, do what you want to do with your family with that.
Awesome. Well, I feel like that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you, listener, for the idea for the episode. Also, we love to hear from y'all. I feel like engagement's gone up a little bit. I feel like we're getting more emails about the podcast, meeting prospects who are like, I listened to all the episodes. It's fun, man.
I think engagement is going to go through the roof now that we had a pretty massive Lane Kiffin segment, right?
Yeah. We're going to be on the first page of
keep
YouTube
your eyes
for that.
peeled.
But so love ideas for future episodes, feedback on anything, podcast@brownleewealthmanagement.com. Like, share, repost, share it with a friend. We appreciate you and we'll see you soon.